I want you to look at the other marks of punctuation beginning with P3. We'll look at the semicolon and the colon briefly. Basically, the semicolon is used to connect sentence elements with equal grammatical rank. The colon is to call attention to words that follow. We may use semicolons to join independent clauses that do not have any conjunctions, or we may use them in conjunction with adverbs or transitional phrases, where the second sentence serves to explain the first. This is one way that you can join independent clauses that need to be corrected from G6. Sometimes we use semicolons when we should use commas. That seems to be a common error. Or we use semicolons when we should use colons. So if you understand the rules for commas and you understand the rules for colons, you're much less likely to make this mistake. Colons draw attention to what follows. You can have a list. You can have an appositive, that is, the second part renames the first. Sometimes we use a comma there, but a colon makes us draw attention to it more clearly. You may use it to precede a quotation. Again, a comma can also be used there, but you are drawing attention to what follows. And then when we have a summary or an explanation. In this case, we can choose between a semicolon and a colon, but be aware of the fact that the colon says, pay attention to what follows. And then, of course, there are the conventional uses in a letter, in time, when we're showing proportions, in titles, and in bibliographical citations. The ways that we often misuse the colon are when we use them to follow a form of the verb be. We don't do that. In fact, generally, a colon does not follow immediately after a verb or a preposition or including. So in those cases, there would not need to be a mark of punctuation at all. However, you can use it, again, to indicate what follows, but generally not after a form of the verb, not after a preposition. P4 deals with the apostrophe, and the primary error that I see is when students do not show possessive. That is, they don't use an apostrophe S to show that there is possession. I don't typically see errors in students using them incorrectly once they do show possession, but that seems to be a common omission. So be aware of that and make that modification if you need to. For quotation marks, there are a number of things that we need to be aware of with regard to quotation marks, not only when we use it to indicate dialogue, but particularly when we use it in academic writing to indicate that we have borrowed material. Quotations are single quotation marks are used if there is a quotation within a quotation. If I said what someone else said, if I had a quote within a quote. Titles of short works, which is articles, books, are italicized for words used as words. So if I say make sure you underline something, then that would be, I would put something in quotation marks. We use it with other marks of punctuation, and this is one that we tend to make errors with. So let's look at it. Periods and commas go inside the closing quotation mark. The one exception has to do with the citation, in-text citations that we use in MLA. That's because the citation goes before the period. Other than that, commas and periods go inside the closing quotation mark. Colons and semicolons follow the closing quotation mark. Question marks and exclamation points, they go inside if the quotation is a question or an exclamation. They go outside if the question is being asked separate from. When we introduce quoted material, we typically have a formal introduction. That is, we let the reader know that something is to follow that is quoted. If it is very formal, it may be a colon. we use he said, she said. We can blend it, and this is something that I want you to think about. Being able to put a quotation within a sentence, work it into your sentence structure rather than feeling like your quotation has to be separate. Notice that the parenthetical citation, that is the page number, goes inside parenthesis after the closing quotation mark, but before the period at the end of the sentence. Again, commas separate the quotation from the rest of the sentence, and commas and periods go inside the closing quotation mark. If you interrupt the quotation, then you separate that central part from the rest of the quotation with commas. The rule: periods and commas go inside closing quotation marks. Colons and semicolons outside. Question marks and exclamation points depends on how you're using it in the sentence. P8 are rules that have to do with capitalization, and again, I don't distinguish between and among these. First of all, proper versus common nouns. Make sure you're using that it is a proper noun, that it is a specific person, place, or thing as opposed to generally. Titles with names like Dr. and Mrs., titles of works. We capitalize the most important words in the titles of works, even if the article uses, even if an article title does not capitalize all the words. In MLA format, we capitalize the important words. Sometimes we capitalize the first word after a colon, particularly if a sentence follows. Be aware of that. That's something that I seldom see problems with. P9 is one that we do tend to have problems with. We do not abbreviate things in academic writing. We do, that is, titles, months. We do use abbreviations for AM or PM. We do use abbreviations for, it says avoid using a period, PM, when not accompanied by a specific figure. That is, it should be a specific time. There should be a dollar amount, not using it just to represent money. Latin abbreviations. These are commonly used Latin abbreviations, and notice it says in formal writing you use appropriate English phrases, but you can use these on occasion. We do get to use this in bibliographical citations, but we typically do not use etc. because we can simply say what we need to say instead of indicating that there are more. Spelling out numbers. If you can say the number in 2 or fewer words, you use words. If it requires 3 or more words, then you may use numerals. The other rule is that no matter, you don't start a sentence with a numeral. If you feel like it's important, reconstruct the sentence if you don't want to write out the words. This is a no excuse mistake. 2 or more words, you use numerals. 2 or fewer words, you use words. Finally, in this section, italics. We use italics for the names of books, longer works, titles of books, magazines, newspapers, long poems, plays, films, television programs. We would have episodes in quotation marks, radio programs, musicals, choreographic works like The Nutcracker, works of visual art, paintings, electronic databases, which we'll be using. The websites themselves are italicized, and electronic games get to be italicized as titles. It says that we also italicize other terms, spacecraft, ships, and aircraft. These are rules that you need to be aware of. Basically, if you think in terms of long things, things that are extended and have parts, they're italicized. If it is the part, it typically is indicated by using quotation marks. Punctuation and errors in punctuation and mechanics are considered to be minor errors, but they still count off a significant amount. 6 errors is considered to be a D paper. If there are multiple infractions of one rule, sometimes I take that into account, but you need to be aware of the rules and see if you can apply them. If you have questions, you can always ask.